How you doing, mate?
I'm all right, mate. I'm good.
Good, and welcome all to My Life, My Music with the Governor, Alan Hudson, where we take a trip down memory lane through chapter and verse and remember those halcyon days of the golden age of football. Uddy, in this episode, it's going to be all about 1971, King's Road, Leeds to Athens.
Yeah, it's. I think we've in our other shows we've spoke about 1971, but I think we're coming at this at a different angle because, especially being a lockdown, we've gone through the lockdown season. You see what can happen in Europe and how things have changed, and even in the Chelsea, our final was weird. You know, playing the two matches in 3 days. And you see Chelsea and who are playing Manchester City now have changed the venue of their match, which really should have been done in our day, really, rather than it just shows you how behind youth were in their thinking, and nothing really has changed in that power. But yeah, 71 was a groundbreaking season for Chelsea. They'd never won in Europe. They'd had a good side the year before, a couple of years before with Venables. George Graham had a fabulous team, and I remember beating Roma down here, and it was a fantastic night of, you know, like they say, when Anfield's lit up. This really was lit up at the bridge, 70,000 people. So, you know, that was a year that really should have, with a manager with his head screwed on properly, Chelsea should have went on to much bigger things.
But we've talked about the importance of management, and you can either be a coach or a manager. And you've done that wonderful podcast with Anthony, Masterminds, and you've educated me over the years, Alan, because I didn't realise how important a good manager is. And you're absolutely right. And I think that the defining thing with Chelsea in those times, a little bit turbulent at times, but very, very successful as well, because the King's Road consumes you. We've talked about this before, but the romance and that Chelsea team had something, magic dust, that other clubs haven't had. And getting rid of or sacking Tommy Docherty really seemed a balmy decision.
Yeah. Your first point about the Chelsea and the King's Road and the gold and all that. I did a podcast 2 or 3 weeks ago with Stevie Perryman, which you complimented
Brilliant.
on, and then Stevie's a great fella. He was a great player at Spurs and that. But we touched on, you know, we touched on this, and I said, well, we had the King's Road with all. I remember watching a thing yesterday about Sean Connery, and he spoke about Chelsea. He was on Parkinson, an old episode of Parkinson, and he was talking to Parkinson about two managers at Chelsea. This is Sean Connery talking about Tommy Docherty and Dave Sexton. Yeah. And that was when all the stars would come to the bridge. You know, Michael Crawford, when he was, some mothers do have him, and he become very friendly with Michael and things like that. Everybody flocked to Stamford Bridge because it was a King's Road and it was a place to be, and it was life changing. And when you think, I've always said that when Chelsea sold me and Osgood, or Osgood and I should say, because he was a big player at that time. I think if I was making a movie, I would have got rid of. Sent Dave Sexton to Stoke City and brought Tony Waddington down to Chelsea, because Tony Waddington would have used that gold dust. He would have said, look, this is the place to have a football team. And knowing that George Best wanted to come down here, he would have probably brought 2 or 3 players. Having played for Stoke after that, he would have brought Jimmy Greenough down with him, who would have got fitted into our Chelsea team fantastically well. And a couple of young players, people like Alan Dodd, who was the best defender I played with around that time, and maybe one other. But then George Best wanted to come. So the nucleus of that Chelsea team to go over and play 2 games against Real Madrid, and we had a couple of injuries. All right, they wasn't the Real Madrid of with Puskas and Di Stefano and all that, but they were a pretty good side, and to beat them over 2 games in 3 days was quite something.
Absolutely, and we're going to touch upon that game in depth with a Game of My Life podcast. But you're right, and Chelsea were ready really to explode. They'd had that relative success. Doherty's Diamonds, the Catch Us If You Can team,
Yeah,
everything was in place for Chelsea, not just to go and conquer Europe, but ultimately turn them into, as they was perceived, a cup team to a league championship team, and could dominate English football and European football for the next 10 years. And instead of exploding on the scene, they imploded, didn't they?
yeah. As I say, when I moved on, to think that Waddington got that Stoke City team to the top of the league when
Yeah,
Liverpool were a great side, and Derby and Clough and Leeds United were maybe coming to the end of their glory years. But if Waddington could do it at Stoke, you can only imagine what he could have done with Chelsea.
yeah,
If we'd have had him as our manager, and all this problem that we have, and I have numerous arguments with people about, and former players from other clubs. Frank McClintock one. I had a discussion with him one day about it, and he said, because Dave Sexton went to QPR after, and Frank was there, and he heard stories from Dave, no doubt. They were friends, and from their early Arsenal years, and he said, "You led Dave Sexton a merry dance, you boys." And I couldn't get my head around it. I went, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you had like a Rat Pack, a drinking firm, and all that." I said, "Well, Frank, that doesn't come into it. We were winning for you. You were all good boys at QBR. You never won nothing,
yeah,
but we won things through enjoying ourselves." And later on, when the Invincibles were going, they had a team. Their back four, Tony Adams, had 2 alcoholics in the team.
yeah.
I said, "What are you talking about? It's all about management, Frank. It's all about handling of your players that you have, and the understanding that you have with your players." And Waddington would have come down to Chelsea, and I don't apologise to keep bringing his name up, but he would have been the kingpin. He would have come down, and he would have sat us down, and he'd have said, "Look, you got a reputation, you lot, but all I'm bothered about you boys doing is entertaining the crowd on a Saturday and winning the league. And you'll only win it by playing at your best. So I need you at your best. So enjoy yourself, but just draw a line." And that's what Dave Sexton couldn't do. And he looked at it, and it was like a red flag to a ball with Dave, and he just wasn't management material.
Yeah.
It was simple as that. Whereas years later, I had to spend time with Jock Stein, and these people, it remind me so much of Waddington, and you can imagine what Shankly was like to be. You've been in awe around these people as a youngster. I was only 18, 19, and you listen to them. You sit down and they say, "Look, don't you think you could be a better player if you didn't do this or you didn't do that?" And you would sit down and listen to them, and this is what they failed to do, and it costs Chelsea, and it costs individual players a lot of, and it causes us a lot of grief in our personal life.
But you're right again. Dave was a coach, he wasn't a manager. You put Busby in that same frame as a manager. These managers didn't take the training. They were managers. They were different, had different roles. And you talked about that being so important. Another manager that you had a problem with, or another manager that seemed to have a problem with you, um, Alf Ramsey. Quite
Yeah,
unbelievable. And although you've picked 5 brilliant tracks, and I've picked the sixth one to go out on because it just it ties in everything nicely about the
yeah,
boys of the King's Road. But our first track by the Bee Gees, "How Can You Mend a Broken Heart?" And
yeah,
if we go back to 1970, because you'd established yourself in the team in 1969-70 season. Your FA Cup run started at the Bridge against my team, Birmingham City. You played the season. You were one of the great players in English football that season, not just for Chelsea. But you missed the World Cup and you missed the FA Cup final. That song from the Bee Gees was a song that they wrote when they'd had a bit of a turbulent time. They got together and Robin and Barry sat down and started writing, and that's what come out of that meeting with the two brothers.
Absolutely, it was all about losing
Yeah,
Andy, wasn't it?
yeah, it was.
And it relates very much to us in many ways because that's what we were. We do these things on with Tony Jimenez, and we're doing one with the people like John Dempsey. We're going to do one on the 71 final before the Chelsea and Man City final, and it it was a heartbreaking time to split that side up, and because in any team you need a pulse, you need a heart, you need the heart of the team, and that's what they've split apart really. And I know that through my, I was thinking yesterday when people say to me about how could you love Stoke more than you love Chelsea, and I said, well, look. It's like a marriage. You split a marriage up, you move on.
Mm.
It's like splitting up with a woman. You move on to another one, and then you love that woman, and you push the other one aside. It's no different. It's like in any other job. You could be in a job and think you're happy as an engineer or a carpenter or something, and then you got this boss that you don't get on with, and then all of a sudden you move on to another job as a carpenter, and all of a sudden you find you're in heaven, and that's what happened to me when I moved on, and I only relate to the problems at Chelsea because I moved on to something far greater in management, and what Waddington would have brought to Chelsea was, we see today with the Frank Lampard and the Tuchel thing, but it's not a knock at Frank. Frank was inexperienced where this fella is not. And he'd been through that experience. Well, Waddington was the same in management, where Dave didn't have that experience in management because he was a coach. He didn't know how to handle his fellow man, really, basically, and he didn't really want to hear. It was we were like he wasn't part of the team, where he should have been. He never in all the times I said to Charlie Cook about 2 weeks ago. I said, did he ever hug you, Dave?
Mm.
And did he ever say to you, Charlie, you were brilliant today? He said, no, he didn't. No. I said, well, don't you think you deserve that? Because you soon hear about it if it's the other way round.
Yep.
When he fell out with Osgood for not picking people up at corners and this, he would fall out with Osgood over that. But he would never congratulate Osgood for scoring the most glorious goal in the FA Cup final, which no other centre forward would have scored. But he should have come out and told the country that this fella is the best centre forward in Europe. But he didn't do it. He failed to do it. But that's part of his job as management. When I got to Stoke, Waddington said Hudson will play for the World 11 before he plays for England. Now that made people sit up. So they'll make that great management. And he didn't say it. He didn't say it to build my confidence he knew I didn't have an ego anyway, but he didn't do it to build my confidence up because he couldn't have done that because my confidence was sky high. But he was trying to let people know, come on, you in the FA, sit up and take note. We're a backwater club like Derby, but we are a great football team, and that is great management.
And I think it's a great point that you bring up, Al, about so many Chelsea fans. Why do you love Stoke City more than Chelsea? Well, why wouldn't you? You had your most successful footballing days at Stoke City. You're not a Chelsea fan, and I think this is what fans really get clouded in their judgment. Football players play for your club and give you everything that they should do, and they do. You actually pay them money because they're professional football players. why would they love one club more than another one, or love the club that they started more than another one? Especially you being a Fulham fan playing for Chelsea. It's quite extraordinary, really, how football fans hang on that Hudson should love Chelsea. Why?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think what clouds their judgment, and we've said a million times, we both agree a million percent on this, that football fans are basically. I mean, as fans at Stoke, they're very educated. Waddington did that, by bringing them great players well before me. They're educated, but they're fickle.
Yeah.
They're so fickle, it's unbelievable. And you can't. It's like banging your head against a wall, telling a Chelsea supporter yesterday that every decision the referee gave should have went Chelsea's way. I was sitting amongst 20, 30 people so totally biased, it's untrue.
Yeah.
And that is the trouble with their judgment, is that they're biased and they're cloudy. And the second part of your question is, people forget, I never played for Stoke City. I played for Tony Waddington. I played for the fans. And I played for myself, and I played for my family. Stoke City didn't care about me because they proved that when they kicked me out.
Yeah.
Because the stand blew off. So they didn't show any love for me, and I didn't show any love for them thereafter. And as I showed no love for Chelsea, they kicked me out. I wasn't in love with the manager, but I was in love with the manager because he got the best out of me. And I remember when my Anthony, who's now the American under-21 manager, I remember thanking Peter Taylor for giving him his first job. Peter Taylor was the one that made David Beckham captain, I think, when he had the England job for a short while. But I thanked him for what he did for Anthony, and my father kind of did the same to Tony Waddington. He thanked Tony Waddington for getting me back on the rails and getting me back to playing my best football. And it was all down to me. It's everything. Well, you can talk about football till you're blue in the face, but it all comes down to management.
Absolutely. 100%. And there was no love for Waddington when he left Stoke. I mean, he'd been there for 17 years and was locked out in the pouring rain when you were back as a player in your second term, wasn't it? So clubs easily forget people, don't they?
Well, there's no, because the knowledge in a boardroom about football is what Brian Clough said. He asked what does directors know about football, and he left a blank page, didn't he?
Yeah.
And that was quite right. And what they done to Tony Waddington when they sacked Tony, really, they should have put, instead of building a statue, they should have put a cross outside and nailed him to the cross.
Yeah.
Basically, and let people see the blood run down, because they killed the man. Again, going back to that song, they broke his heart.
Yeah.
And when you break someone's heart at that stage of their life, who have given you everything, it goes back to a marriage. If you give, I wasn't a very good husband, so my wife tells me I was the worst in the world. She once told me on air. And I must maybe you were right. Maybe you're right. I don't think you're right, but you could be right. But I'm most certainly pride myself on being a good father, and that's what a manager should do. He should treat the players like his kids, and get and help them through bad periods. When I had my bad ankle injury at Chelsea, which put me back and cost me numerous England caps, changed my life internationally. Nobody at Chelsea ever asked me, "How's your ankle?"
Yeah.
And then when I got to Stoke and broke my leg, we had a gynecologist as a club doctor.
Yeah.
Now, how does that work out? This is Stoke City, who've paid £250,000 for me, wanted to pay £325 for £1,000 for Peter Oscar. That's nearly 800 grand. And we got a gynecologist to look after us as footballers. Can you imagine that today with Lionel Messi?
It's incredible.
Or Ronaldo. Or today, Harry Kane. Harry Kane pulls up with a hamstring and the whole world stops. because Tottenham need this centre forward. Well, so did we. We needed the world to stop for us because we were that injury I carried with me throughout my playing career, and I was having injections. I was seeing doctors here, there, and everywhere. I even got reprimanded by Chelsea for going outside the club for seeing doctors. I said, "Well, you won't look at me, so somebody's got to do it because I need my ankle fixed," and it led to again bad management. Why? I remember when Ferguson bought Van Nistelrooy and he broke down before he signed him. And the story goes, and I spoke to Brian Robson the other day, he was on the phone to Van Nistelrooy every day of the week asking him how his injury was.
Yeah.
Because he wanted him better. He said, I hope you're getting the best treatment. Although he was in Amsterdam or wherever he was at that time, he was prepared to send doctors from all over the world to get Van Nistelrooy better so he could sign him.
Yeah.
Now, that for me is management at the highest level. And that is why he was so totally successful, because he cared about each and every one of his players.
And that leads us nicely to your next musical pick and reference, Stevie Wonder, If You Really Love Me, because that's what management and that's what you've been talking about in this podcast. If you really love me, managers should love their players. You're right, Fergie
Absolutely.
did, Busby did, all the great
Yeah.
managers do.
Yeah.
And just that phone call, like, Sir Alex to Rude, how you doing, son? How are you? You okay? Don't worry about getting back. Get yourself fit. Get yourself well. Whenever you're well, whenever you're fit, come back, but don't rush yourself. How refreshing is that to hear for a player? That's something that you never got while you were at Chelsea. You went everywhere to get that ankle ready for the FA Cup final and for Mexico. Even went to specialists in Harley Street, and all you got was aggravation for that.
Yeah, I got slapped wrist by Chelsea and finally got slapped wrist by England. But the thing, the Nistelrooy, because I asked Brian Robson the other day about Nistelrooy. He said he was an incredible player, incredible man. Well, this wouldn't have happened if it weren't for Ferguson. If he would have just pushed him aside and say, well, if we'll sign him when he's fit, and just left it at that. But no, he made that fella feel so wanted, and he must have been every night getting into bed, Van Nistelrooy, and dreaming of going to Manchester United to play for Alex Ferguson because he felt he wanted. Well, there's no if you ask any person who lived through a life, whatever life, there's nothing like being wanted.
Absolutely.
But to be unwanted is a terrible feeling. And when Oscar and I, a couple of years later, 18 months later, were kicked out and we were unwanted, and there was only two men that wanted us. One was Waddington and the other was Laurie McMenemy, who established him as a fantastic Southampton side. Really, I think he had 7 or 8 England captains in his team.
Yeah.
Because that was what you call great management. All right, they weren't all the best players in the world, but they had that experience that took Southampton. I mean, their fans would never forget that time there. All through McMenemy.
Again, 1976, they won the FA Cup. He'd assembled a great group of tremendous pros that were all winners, all captains on the pitch, and it doesn't come by chance assembling a football team. It comes down to great management. Going back to Ramsey, he was singing your praises in 1970. You were on the original 40 that were going to go. You would have gone to Mexico, no question about that. 100% you'd have gone to Mexico. But, there's nothing that this boy can't achieve in football. Ramsey once said, and then a couple of years after, he's banned you from playing for England. It's just unbelievably bad management.
Well, I said 1,000,001 times that it could only happen in England.
Yeah.
It wouldn't happen. If you imagine a young Jim Baxter in Scotland years ago, a young Dennis Law, a young Kenny Dalglish coming through. If you can imagine in Amsterdam a young Johan Cruyff, or in Argentina a young Diego Maradona, in Brazil a young Pele, being treated like that. You can't treat your upcoming. I mean, today, even in the modern day, you know, the way they treat people like Maddison and Jack Grealish, they wrap them up in cotton wool because these are players for the future, great players for the future. But what happened in our day? They were just. It was basically, Paul. I'm not kidding. People laugh at me when I tell them it was run like a pub team.
Yeah. It was,
You
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it really was. It was so unprofessional. If you got players of the ilk of Peter Osgood and Charlie Cook, you want the best doctors because you want your best team on that field. But it seemed that he didn't really care. Dave was so interested. He was so wrapped up in his coaching manual. He was more worried what was in the coaching manual than the state of his players and their minds. I mean, Glenn Hoddle, I think he made a massive mistake when he managed England, bringing in Eileen Drury.
Yeah.
But someone along them, somewhere within there, was a good idea because you want your players mentally fit as well as physically fit. And what happened after 1970 going into 71 was such a huge lift for me to win the Cup Winners' Cup. Although it was a bit of a blur, which we'll go on to, it was such a lift. But I had to do that all on my own. I had no help from the medical staff, and I had no help from management. And that is why when people they go on, and I've heard people behind my back say, oh, he's at it again, Hudson, talking about this and the other. Well, I only go on about it because I'm trying to get them to understand the game a little bit more and what goes on in the walls of Stamford Bridge, in the walls of the Victoria Ground. And when I was at Highbury, I couldn't believe that Terry Neill could get rid of Alan Ball, arguably one of the greatest midfield players of our time. And then Laurie McMenemy, I remember seeing Alan Ball in the passage when he was leaving, and he was broken-hearted again, and he didn't want to leave Arsenal. Arsenal fans were full. He made it out, Terry Neill, that Alan Ball didn't want to play for Arsenal. Alan Ball loved Arsenal, but he didn't want him there because he'd become too big for it. He was too big for Terry Neill. And Laurie McMenemy thought, Alan Ball is for sale. He got him for peanuts. And he took him to Southampton to join his band of England captains. And Alan Ball, well, he had 2 or 3 fantastic years there, even going into his 30s, which led to me and him playing in the England team together. I was fortunate enough to play alongside him because in my England debut, I couldn't have played like that without Alan Ball being alongside me, because the man was not only a fantastic player, but an inspiration for what people see in 1966, and they talk about Alan Ball. They don't even know how good Alan Ball was.
Absolutely. But again, going back to the way that England, and some football clubs were running those days. When you went on that England under 23, so when you were called back, and you were made captain, but it was only Willie Madron that says, well, who should be captain because he's the best player. There was no plan. There was just a group of people, football players, that went there in the hotel. I mean, was he beating Will?
No. It was Paul Fun, strangely enough, it was the weirdest thing. We turned up at Heathrow. I just got over through Waddington. They dropped my band by about 6 months, I think, which was a load of rubbish. It was trash anyway. It just shows you what trash the FA were and still are, basically. And we got to Heathrow Airport to fly to France and go on to Turkey, so I was recalled back into it, and then Ken Furphy, who played at Watford, I think he managed Watford for a little while. He was in charge of that under 23 team, and it just for the trip. And he said, look, he called us all in. I remember 3 or 4 of us sitting on suitcases, and he went, look, he said, I'm new to this job. I don't really know who I'm going to choose as captain. He said, "Can we have a show of hands?" So, and this reminded me at Chelsea when they took the captaincy of Ron Harris, they called us all in, give us a pen and paper to write down who we wanted to be the next captain. That's how good the management was, and it reminded me of that. But at the airport, everybody kind of looked around at each other as much as say, who am I going to pick here? And I didn't really give a two monkeys what gone on, because what England have already cut my arm and my leg off anyway, so I weren't gonna be too bothered about whether I played or I didn't play, or whether I travelled or I didn't travel. It didn't interest me. And then big Willie Madden, a big centre half at Middlesbrough, who most of the people in the country wouldn't have heard of anyway. He was a lovely big lad, and he was a bloody good player for Middlesbrough. As hard as nails, I wouldn't want to be a centre forward against Willie. And he just spoke up at the back, because he was standing at the back because he was the biggest lad in the team, and he just pointed at me and he went, "Well," I said, "surely it's common sense." And first he said, "What is?" He says, "Well," he said, "he's the best player in this squad. Surely he should be captain." And Willie was doing the management for him. He was just a under 23 player, inexperienced in international level. But even a layman coming off the street, even an electrician, could have said, "Well, I think he should be captain." You know, it's like you and I have had discussions, and I've had it with Don, and I've had it with Jimenez. What the first thing we do? What would the first thing we do if we take over Aston Villa? We make Jack Grealish captain, and we build the team around him. That's what we do. Well, you don't have to be too bright to actually know that. It's just something that is there staring you in the face. If you don't make this fella the kingpin of your team, you're going to lose him.
Absolutely.
So so that's all down to what the FA. What did they know about making some? They should have they didn't have an England manager, so they should have cancelled the tour because they're so worried about the money.
Yeah, it's always been the case, Alan. Neither as late as 78 with England. Ron Greenwood phoned you up in boots. It's just incredible. But Rainy Days and Mondays by the Carpenters, released on St George's Day 1971. This was Dave Sexton's song, sending us across Epsom Downs racecourse after he'd had a decent weekend. I mean, again, it's just incredible management, isn't it?
Well, that was. I'm a great fan. My love for music, and Karen Carpenter had the most glorious voice, as good as any. And it just happened that was in the charts that year, and it fell into what we're discussing. But the other one was I Don't Like Mondays. It was, by Geldof, the Boomtown Rats, and that came a little bit later through obviously that disaster. But that was when everyone started having Mondays off. And I remember, all my friends would not go to work on a Monday because they say, "Well, I'm a Boomtown. We're having Monday off." Well, that was us on a Monday at Chelsea. If Dave Sexton smelt our breath on a Monday morning, he would think, "Well, it's no good getting the ball out because half of them can't see the ball. I'll run them over Epsom Downs." And that was our rainy days of Mondays. We'd run around every time there's people watch the derby and say, "Oh, what a glorious place, Epsom Downs." Well, we used to run around that on a Monday, but come up Tatton, get to Tatton Corner and go up and down that hill and think you don't even know nothing about the derby, mate. We used to run that course half drunk. On a Monday morning, and then it would rain, and it was rainy days of Mondays, and we were getting, I'd never forget, we would go over from Mitcham to Epsom, which is about a 20-minute drive, and Norman Meadows, our physio, who went on to be the physio with England. Norman was a nice lad, and he would drive the team bus, and he would have to put the air conditioning thing on, so the steam on the windows from the alcohol from the weekend was horrendous, and then we'd get out the van and everyone would go, you talk about their weekend, and Dave Sexton would grimace, where Well, going back to the Waddington thing, he would find that quite amusing.
Yeah.
He would say, well, you played terrific Saturday. You've enjoyed your weekend. Now let's get down to some hard graft. Yeah, but he wouldn't take the coaching with a long face. He would leave it to the coaches and forget what you'd done that weekend. Don't run the boys too hard. He wouldn't. He knew we were fit. We didn't need to run around Epsom. But it was a kind of being back at school. It was like a punishment for going out drinking. Well, if someone tells you not to do it, the first thing you're going to do?
Exactly.
You do it, don't you?
Yeah.
And that's what we did. So we continued, and it was the same thing the other day with talking to Robbo again. And I didn't touch him. Me and Tony Jimenez laughed about it afterwards. He said, "Well, I thought you was going to touch on the Norman Whiteside and Paul McGrath and their little drinking affairs, And I went, no, I wouldn't put him in that. I wouldn't put Brian in that position. I didn't want to embarrass him because I got too much respect for him. But what Ferguson done, he addressed the matter.
Yeah.
And he said, look, I don't care how great a player as you are. Either you knuckle down and do it my way or you're out. And as it happens, it was the greatest thing that happened. Gary Neville must go to bed every night and, go with a picture of Sir Alex on his wall and thank him. Because the two Neville brothers would never have been heard of. And Phil Butt and, these people, or Nicky Butt, whatever his name is, they would never have been heard of it if Norman Whiteside had carried on, buckled down, and Paul McGrath, probably one of the greatest players, centre halves I've ever seen at Villa. He was incredible on one leg. But it was all, again, it was all down to management. You wouldn't say that Brian Robson, who was the best captain since Bobby Moore at national level, you wouldn't say to Brian, I'm going to send you around, do 2 cross country today because you was out the night before. I mean, how childish, you're just like, it's going back to school again, isn't it?
It certainly is, and leads us nicely on to your 4th pick today, Al. What's going on? Something that you asked your manager continuously, and
Absolutely.
Also your wife was asking you, what's going on?
Absolutely, but I couldn't answer the question but she did what she must have wondered throughout our marriage what was going on, and us Chelsea players were wondering about our manager, what's going on.
Yeah.
Please tell us what's going on, because if you don't relate to one another, then you ain't going to get anywhere. You're just going to be. Everybody at Chelsea, our Chelsea team, were looking at each other, wondering what's going on. And it was I said we were close to having a mutiny at Chelsea. That's how close it was. Now that today it would have happened because we would have all been millionaires, and we would have had a mutiny.
Yeah.
We would have walked and we would have said, look, we're not coming in training, we're not playing under this manager because he doesn't know how to he doesn't know how to manage the football team. And and even in modern day football, this Tuchel's come in and he's taken a load of Chelsea players who was struggling, and the fans weren't happy. And all right, they got beat yesterday in the FA Cup final, but that was through superior management on the day. You have to communicate with your players. And I'm afraid where there's no communication, there's no performance.
Absolutely, and
so what's going on?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you know what the story behind the song was?
Well, I can only imagine it was something to do with his dad shooting him. I don't know. No, I don't really know. But I often, when I listen to the song, which is fantastic, and it reminds me so much of our days. Please, somebody tell me what's going on. But you obviously going to tell me, aren't you?
Yeah, it was one of the Four Tops, Ronaldo Benson. They'd arrived in the tour bus at Barclay, presumably to have a gig.
Yeah.
This was on the 15th of May, 1969. And He witnessed police brutality in the city's People's Park, and it was during a protest by anti-war activists, which
Yeah.
is hailed Bloody Thursday. Well, he discussed what he'd witnessed with his friend and songwriter Al Cleveland, who wrote then some lines, some lyrics. And in 1970, Benson gave the untitled song to Marvin Gaye, who added melody, put a few little tweaks into to the lines and to the lyrics, and gave it the title "What's Going On," and hence, what a great song!
Yeah, and plus the fact he didn't really know, but he didn't really know what he was touching on. I mean, that song would last forever and
Yeah,
ever and ever. And what's going? I mean, it's like, we're not allowed to talk about it, I know, but it's like the players still going down on one knee. What's going on?
yeah,
No people, because, and I say that in a way that, not that I agree with it or disagree with it. I think our Chelsea team would have refused to do it in the 70-71 because, we did see everybody as equal. There was no problem. And I still think we would still agree that we're all equal. There's no problem. They're making a big deal out of nothing really. This country's not happy unless they're having a protest. And what's going on? Uh, Basically, people. There's one thing I dislike. We were talking about honesty the other day, and hypocrisy is close to dishonesty. And these people are going down on one knee. Do they really believe in it? I'm not talking about the other race. I'm talking about the white man is going down on one knee. Half of them are doing it because they're told to do it.
correct.
So that's wrong. That's hypocrisy.
Mm.
Why doesn't someone stand up and say, I'm not doing it because I'm not racial, and I'm not sending a warning out there because this is nothing to do with football. It's society, and if it's happening in schools. It's my little niece, who is now in her late 30s, was called racial when she was 7 or 8.
Mm.
These two people from the school knocked on my sister's door and said, "Your daughter's racial." And I said, "Excuse me, my daughter's 6 years of age.
Mm.
She doesn't even know what racial is." And they said, "Well, she hit a little girl in the playground." So I said, well, please tell me why." And they said, "Well, the little girl hit her first." She said, "Well, what's racial about that?"
Mm.
She said, "I told my daughter, if anyone hits you, hit them back.
Yeah.
No matter whether they're white, black, blue, pink, yellow, whatever colour they are, wherever they come from, if anyone lays a finger on you, don't think that I'm going to come down and hit them or anything. You stick up for yourself." And they come round, and so it goes back to that far. And this is before Marvin Gaye brought out What's Going On.
Yeah.
Oh no, it was after. So what is going on there? If I was them two people knocked on my door and accused my son of being racial at 6 years of age, I would ask them what's going on.
Yeah.
And they would have to come up with an answer to me, because there is no psychiatrist in this world that could tell you at 6 years of age that you're racial.
Absolutely, and there has been a player that's come out. Well, there's been a few actually, but Wilfried Zaha being one of them says, "I ain't kneeling. What's the point? What's going on? Has it
Yeah,
changed anything? No. Has it made a difference? Has it made racial harmony any better? No. I think it's made it worse. I
oh,
think it's
absolutely, mate.
caused a divide, and I would say to the football authorities, stop taking the knee now, because it hasn't made any difference. What's
Yeah,
going
yeah,
on? And I think that
yeah,
there must be bigger agendas, because once upon a time there was, You can't wear even a poppy on an England kit to commemorate the fallen in the Second World War. Well, all the wars for that matter. But now all of a sudden, football is just going so political. I mean, there was
Yeah,
even a case of the Palestinian flag brought onto the Wembley pitch. What I would say to football, let football be football and let the politicians do politics. The two don't mix. Can we just please have our bloody game back?
absolutely. Couldn't agree more, mate. You sound exactly like me talking now. I couldn't. It's gone too far. And if I was a manager and I thought my players had their mind on going down on a knee when they went out on the field, I would pull them aside and say, well, you're not playing today. You're not in the right frame of mind. You're playing for all the wrong reasons. You're paid by this football club to play football.
Yeah.
You're not paid by this football club to get your what you feel about the world. It happened in America with the soldiers coming back from Vietnam. What happened then? Well, that's going to be the next thing. Our soldiers in this country are probably the one thing that we can be proud of. And the young doctors and nurses that looked after me when I was in hospitals. I've never been so proud with the English. But when you start bringing it onto the football field, it's not on, mate. It's not on. It's football. People don't work hard all week and then go Saturday afternoon to see people kneel down. They go and want to see them do their best.
They want to be entertained, and that's
Yeah.
what you guys at Chelsea did. You entertained. Fifth track that you've picked for this month, Al. If You Could Read My Mind, what a fantastic song by Gordon Lightfoot. And his inspiration was divorce. And again, there's been a thread of breakup, and the fact that after 71, after you'd won the Cup Winners' Cup, you got beat by Stoke City in 72, and then ultimately in 1973, you and Oz were sold to Southampton and to Stoke City. But that should have been the springboard, and I think we've talked so much about the fact that a decent manager would have kicked Chelsea on, but if you could read my mind, what a wonderful track. The feeling's
Well,
gone, I just can't get it back. It's like
yeah.
you guys at Chelsea.
Yeah, it really, it was a track that when I looked at it, it just jumped out at me, and think it's so apt for what our discussion, because we all wanted to know what's going on, but we also wanted to know. I told you about the situation when we was abroad once, and we asked to see the manager and sit down and have a beer with him downstairs and sort it out. So basically, we were asking him, what's on his mind, kind
Yeah.
of thing. And we'll tell you what's on our mind, because we're not happy players. And an unhappy player is not a good player. And we want to be happy. We wanted to go on, and we used to come back from away games at Chelsea, going to a pub in the King's Road, and for 30, 45 minutes, we would have a team meeting about what went on in that game today. And I remember Osgood one night. This is on a Saturday night when everybody thought we was out doing all the wrong things. We were actually. Osgood looked at me. He said, "If you don't pull your finger out," he said, "we're going to be in trouble." He said to me, and I said, "What do you mean by that?" He said, "Ah, you're not playing anywhere near what you can do. You got to sort yourself out, son." And that should have been the manager telling me that,
Yep.
not Peter Osgood.
Yeah.
And I went, "Oz, you don't know what's going on with me, mate. You really don't know what's going on. I've got problems with my anger. I've got problems with the manager. I've got problems indoors with my wife. I've got problems. But, it shouldn't be you trying to sort that out." He said, "Al, all I'm worried about is what happens with us on a Saturday afternoon." And that I found out when I moved from Chelsea, that was all Waddington was worried about, Saturday afternoon. But if you did have a problem at home, or you had a problem off the field, or you had a problem with your injury, then he'd get it sorted, like he did by getting the fire brigade in the water the pitch because I had a bad ankle. Now, that's management. Dave Sexton wouldn't have thought about water, and the only water he'd have put on Stamford Bridge would have been holy water. It was that ridiculous. But that is the difference between, Waddington could read your mind,
Yeah,
funnily enough, and he could tell that if you weren't happy, he would speak to you, and he would sort it out because he wanted you to be happy. When we went on tour, I'd see him with young kids, go out and enjoy yourself, see the world. He said, and when we get back, you train hard, and if you enjoy this trip, then you're going to go home, you're going to work harder so you can go on another trip, and then you get in the first team, and then it'll be even sweeter. He didn't want you to stay indoors and watch Coronation Street and EastEnders, and be a good boy. You don't learn nothing by being good all the time.
yeah, absolutely. But again, going back to another thread that's come through this podcast, communication, and that's what management and good management does. They communicate. You don't have to read somebody's mind. You just say to them, "Al, you okay?" Like with Fergie, with Rude, like with all great managers, is everything okay? You okay at home? You okay with your form? You're all right with your injury? You know what's going on? It's
Yeah,
quite simple, Al, isn't it? Really,
yeah, yeah.
management, football.
Yeah, well, Ron Greenwood said that, and he said simplicity is genius, and it basically that should be the sign on the wall, shouldn't it?
Yeah,
Uh, and it's so simple. And I think the one player that could probably say that more than anyone is Ronaldo's become the biggest star, and you listen to all the Manchester United players, how he worked hard on his game and what he became.
yeah,
He wouldn't have done without Ferguson.
yeah.
And Ferguson looked after him. He took him from Porto, and he brought him into Manchester United, and the sky was the limit. Then he just wanted to be the best, and everything he did was simple.
Yeah.
He just worked and worked and worked on his game, like David Beckham. Beckham wouldn't be where he is today if he didn't work on his free kicks and that silly wall they put up. So it's all the simple things in the game that people can pick up on and say, this was why I become what I became, because I did the simple things properly.
Absolutely. And you referenced the sky's the limit, and it's time, almost time for the end of the podcast. We're going to finish with me knowing you, you knowing me. And although I didn't meet any of those Chelsea players, although I didn't know any of these Chelsea players, I get an affinity to those Chelsea players through doing the podcast with you. So the only song that we can go out with is Spirit in the Sky, because you boys had such a great time whilst in the air,
Well,
didn't you?
I remember that song. I remember that song being, yeah, I remember when it come out, and that really did epitomise our team, and especially the thing that led us into 1971. I mean, we were the underdogs against Leeds at Old Trafford, but it was the spirit in the sky that night that got us through. It was nothing else. It wasn't ability. It was the spirit, the team spirit, and that song really does epitomise the Chelsea spirit at that time. And it didn't really matter. They talk about today. Well, we had three players injured. They played 3 games in a week or 2 games in 5 days or whatever. Well, that for me is the biggest load of trash I've ever heard in my life. Because if you got the spirit and you, as I say, I played for 15 years on a bad ankle, and it's only your spirit that gets you through. It's a lot of people would have retired with the kind of injury I had. And when I come out of hospital, they said, "You'll never walk again." I said, "Well, won't I? We'll see about that." So it's all about spirit. It's all about what you got inside you, and what led. We would never have been in Athens if Osgood and the boys at Old Trafford hadn't. If we hadn't won that match, 71 wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
72 wouldn't have happened, and Chelsea would have folded before they actually folded. And Leeds would have boasted winning the FA Cup, and then they'd have went on to win that cup that year because they were a better side than us, all round, but they didn't have our spirit. And it was our spirit that beat Leeds that night. They just couldn't cope. They just couldn't cope with us coming back 3 times. They thought they had the cup in the bag on 3 occasions, and 3 times we fought back. And when we went ahead, they didn't come back. So that tells you that we had more spirit than them.
Absolutely, and you certainly had a lot of spirit on those aeroplanes served you by the way. The
As
aerosters.
Johnny Goodman would say. My friend John Goodman, yes, we did have spirit in the sky on that coming back from Hungary, yeah. And we never, John, it was amazing when I see him at Haydock Park, and all them years later, and he introduced me as a man that got him out of the England team, which was quite funny. And it was true, but you could tell by his letter that or his email that he meant it, that you just have to face, you have to laugh at the things you had to come across. Goodman was he was a terrific right back, and he kicked him out of the England squad because he had a drink on the plane with me, and it's just too stupid to be true. Look what England done to Bobby Moore when over the bracelet. They ignored Bobby Moore in Bogota. They left him to rot. They hung him out to dry. And the only way he answered them back was to bounce back and play that most magnificent match against Mexico, in Mexico against Brazil. And that was his answer to all them at the FA and Alf Ramsey. You forgot me in Bogota. Jimmy Greaves didn't forget him, but he went to visit him. But he bounced back, and that's when Pele turned around and said, "This fella's the greatest defender in the world." Well, I know a lot of people I come across in my football career that would have refused to play.
Yeah.
They said, "Well, you're going to treat me like that. You're going to hang me out. You're going to if you're not going to answer the press, if you're not going to tell the press that I didn't steal that bracelet, then I'm not going to play for you because I didn't do it, and you've hung me out to dry." Because it was obvious he didn't nick the bracelet, because they also done Gordon Banks, didn't they, before the Germany game? He had food poisoning.
Mm.
So there was something going on there. You go to these countries and that's what happens. You've got fit up in a jewelry shop, and then the best goalkeeper, the best defender in the world gets stitched up with a jewelry heist, and the best goalkeeper in the world gets food poisoning. Now tell me that there's not something, there's a conspiracy not going on here. It's but what did the England manager do? Nothing. And when the chips were down against Germany, 2-0 up, the response wasn't there.
Again, Al, management and communication.
Absolutely, and spirit.
Yeah. So
in the sky.
Giddy by name, giddy by nature.
Giddy by name, giddy. I'm going to send this to him as soon as this comes out. He's a great lad as well, and he epitomises what goes on in football. He's a Scouser, by the way.
Yeah, he's great right back.
Great right back, and it was such a great shame that he went to Stoke when I left years later, because if he'd have played in our Stoke team, he would have made it that little bit superior than what we actually were, because our right back Jackie Marsh at that time was coming. He got contact lens. He was losing his sight, and we needed someone like Giddy at that time. And as I say, at Stoke, as at Chelsea, we're only a couple of players from taking on and going on to win the European Cup, really.
Absolutely.
And that's not being blasé or over the top, because if Brian Clough could do it with Nottingham Forest with the players that he had, then we most certainly could have done it.
Oh, absolutely spot on. And put a good word in for me. I'd love to do a podcast with John Goodman, an absolute Villa legend, and to this day, probably the greatest right back, certainly that I've seen play at Aston Villa. So let's raise a glass or do to those iconic Chelsea players that conquered Europe 50 years ago, the ones that are present and the ones that sadly didn't make the journey.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I agree with you. They were fantastic. It was a fantastic year for. It was a fantastic year for Chelsea Football Club. But all the wrong people got the credit.
Yeah,
and that's a bittersweet about the shows that you and I do. Is that it is bittersweet because the wrong people get the accolades, and as in football, the wrong people get the money.
They listen to the wrong people, Al. We wonder why the game's in the state it's in.
Absolutely. We see it again yesterday in the FA Cup final, the VAR, the referee, and when are the FA going to learn that this VAR is not going to work the way it's being run, and it's going to destroy. And then, as I said, I sat in between 20, 30 Chelsea supporters yesterday, and they were all screaming and hollering about this. Well, that's what happens when you've got a system like we have in England that doesn't work, and someone's got to address it. And somebody has got to stand up who's got a name, because they're all faceless people. These people that bring out these new rules are all faceless. Somebody sits behind a desk somewhere and they come up with this most ridiculous, and it goes way back to the past, back to the goalkeeper rule, and then the next one, and this stupid rule about not waving the flag at offside immediately is going to get somebody very hurt. And it happened with Van Dijk. If they'd have flagged up early on, maybe he wouldn't have been out all season and Liverpool wouldn't be in such trouble.
Absolutely. It's going from bad to worse, and from the sublime to the ridiculous. So,
absolutely.
Till next time, cheers, pal, and thanks for listening. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, mate. Thanks, Paul.